Hello everyone, John Curran, Behaviour Specialist here. I'm going to do a video for you here today, and basically the last piece of the puzzle concerning the A.C.E program. We've kind of covered the adult figures and the environment and the importance of these two kind of key areas. So we'll just finish off with the sort of pyramid system and obviously discuss the client and the role that they kind of play within this pyramid system. What you have to always remember for the client is every client that you'll work with, every individual that you'll be involved with here will be unique in terms of their displays, will be unique in terms of their reasoning, their level of value, and obviously for them as an individual, how they interact, how they see the world will be very unique to them. So what we always find here for a client is a lot of adult figures might struggle to understand the reasoning behind behaviour for this individual. They might not understand or recognise what role the environment plays for this individual. And again, look, this is where we have to gather information, look at trends, see sort of similarities and patterns that are kind of developing over time. And then that allows us to put the correct structures and the correct information or strategies in place for the specific areas that we need to focus on. But what I always say to adult figures is, in terms of the client, most of the time the adult figures will understand the client more, will have a long history with the client, especially if it's parents that are involved with this client. They'll always understand the strengths, the weaknesses for the individual. They might understand certain triggers, they might understand certain environmental factors that will impact. They might recognise approaches, reactions and responses from themselves that drive levels of behaviour for an individual. So it's always a good understanding in terms of the link between these two key elements whenever you're trying to work with an individual as well, to kind of recognise these pieces. But as I say, look, depending on the client in terms of an age bracket, in terms of diagnosis, in terms of contributing factors in some way, understanding levels of need, maybe historical factors that might be involved for an individual. That's where you gather all the information on this individual. They allow you to maybe understand a wee bit more why these behaviours are occurring. And again, look, a behaviour can occur for an individual for a number of reasons. It could be communication, it could be historical, it could be trauma, it could be changes in environment, it could be adult figures that are coming in terms of their approach, their reactions and responses, it could be natural environmental triggers. There's loads of things that can be occurring here, but it's always good to understand functional value as an initial starting point. And then, as I say, maybe understand levels of need, understand history as we kind of go along there as well. But in order to understand that, we have to be recognising too that though the client's massively reliant on these other two areas in terms of their behaviour, in terms of outcomes, in terms of value, and in terms of the actual display itself and understanding that. So again, we're always trying to figure out for the client what is the links between the client's behaviour and these kind of two key areas. And again, look, the client a lot of the time will be heavily reliant on an adult here in terms of their behaviour and the outcomes that are delivered by the behaviour, the influence that their behaviour might have. Because again, on a regular basis, the displays that come from this individual usually will influence or impact on an adult figure that's kind of there, and then the resultant consequence or the resultant value that kind of comes will usually be delivered by this individual on a high percentage of the time. The only time that it really doesn't need another individual or need a different outcome is if it's self-stimulation for this individual. So if they behave in a certain way that seems to stimulate them or activate one of their senses within their internal system, and again, that's where a value is determined by them, again for themselves, and again that behaviour stimulates that level for themselves, so adds that value for themselves. They're not reliant on anyone else. And again, look, you're trying to figure out these patterns as you're kind of going along and working these pieces out, and possibly determining which behaviours are influenced by adult figures, which behaviours are influenced by environment, which behaviours are possibly just a stimulation level for themselves. So again, we have to work out these pieces and start to identify in terms of strategies, in terms of intervention and protocols we're going to put in place. What is designed for each specific area, what is designed here, and what can be adaptable. And that's the big key that I always find when I'm working with the adult figures especially, is understanding how you adapt an approach depending on a situation or scenario, how you adapt an approach depending on a behaviour that may be driven by a value or may be driven by an internal piece or an internal processing element, sensory overload, any specific piece that might have a contributing factor where this individual is not majorly in control. Because it is so important, folks, that we have that ability to adapt for an individual, to adapt an approach, to adapt a reaction, to adapt a response depending on what's going on for them. And again, client is heavily reliant on adult figures to take that lead role, to take that sort of element of understanding on for themselves, and then adapt our approach accordingly to make sure that we get the best possible outcome for this individual. An outcome that's progressive, an outcome that's adaptable, an outcome that understands maybe the situation and scenario, maybe the difficulty within that, maybe the fact that this is just value based, or maybe trying to influence outcomes in whatever way. And then again, coupled with the environment, the adult understanding if there's specifics within this environment that is impacting here in the individual, and those specifics can be controlled by us in some way where we can have more of a positive impact, then we have to take that on as adult figures. We have to recognise that for this client and stuff as well too. So as I say, the client's always heavily reliant on these two other areas, but again, you'll often see that I always revert back to the adult figures having such a major input and an impact on these specific pieces, and for them to take control for individuals, they understand that they can have a major positive influence on these individuals kind of moving forward. But as I say, look, it's always unique for each client. It's always interesting when you go into every situation or scenario or every support system for individuals, and recognising the differences, the changes, and the fact that every case is always different. There's always something quite unique. There's always something that's kind of new for yourself to understand and recognise. And again, that all adds experience to these situations. And over the last 15 years, I've gathered so much experience, so much information, so much understanding that we often know now how to point things in the right direction to get the most effective results. So again, it's just a wee bit on the client, and again, you'll see the heavy reliance on the other two areas, within the pyramid system. And again, hopefully you recognise and understand the value of this system and the simplicity centred around it as well too, folks. So again, wee bit of information for you there just to give you an understanding from the client's perspective and where they're at. And again, like just understanding how we can influence this individual, how we can positively impact and be progressive for them. Thank you.